My name is Trace Fisher, and this is the second ever episode of the Unorthodox podcast. However, what I'm going to present to you today isn't really necessarily a podcast, but more like a um, sermon, I guess, if you will, or just a presentation on idolization, right? And kind of when love becomes a trap instead of a blessing. I want to have a conversation with you about love, trauma bonds, faith, and what happens when you put humans only where God belongs. And Unorthodox itself isn't necessarily a faith-based podcast, but today I felt like I wanted to talk about a little bit about my faith and how that can affect our relationships with others, right? So let's just really get started. Um, I want to dive into something deep, right? Something that I've lived through in the hardest way possible, right? And I'm talking about idolization, not just in relationships, but in all areas of life. Idolization itself is when you take a human or a feeling or a habit and you put it in a place where only God should be. And when you do that, you don't just fall in love with that person or that thing, you fall into bondage. So we'll start here. Exodus 23 says, "You shall have no other gods before me." And this, when you think of idolization, it kind of in the biblical text, it's often worshiping a statue, right, or a figurine. But that's not what we're talking about here. So it's not just about statues, right? It's about people, it's about emotions, it's about addictions, it's about validation. Any relationship that we elevate above God and above our own identity. Um, so, it can, like I said, it kind of looks a little bit different today. The idolization now looks like intense relationships. It looks like people we depend on. It looks like unhealthy attachments. It looks like attention. It looks like emotional highs, or sometimes even trauma. And we'll dig into that a little bit later. Your idolization is when your heart bows to something, right, that's greater than God. And as we go through this, I'm going to ask some questions who are watching this, just some things that you can maybe reflect on in your own life. So, where do you think right now in your own life do you tend to put above your own peace? We've all got something, right? So I just want you to think about that as we go along here. So let's dive in a little bit deeper into idolization, as to what it is. So, like I had mentioned before, it's when you stop seeing somebody maybe as human, right? And you start seeing them as your healer or your stability or your purpose or your source, right? It doesn't really feel unhealthy at first. Sometimes it could feel romantic, special. It can feel deep. Sometimes it can even feel like it's your destiny. But the truth is, idolization is love mixed with emptiness. It's passion mixed with insecurity. And it's intimacy mixed with like addiction, like chemicals. All right. So Jeremiah 17:5 says, "Cursed is the one who trusts in man, whose heart turns away from the Lord." And what it's saying is like trusting someone isn't the problem. It's turning them into our ultimate source is. Right. So has there ever been somebody or someone or something, we'll just say someone, whose mood maybe had too much control over your emotions? I mean, I'm sure if you look back, it could be someone you're with now, an ex, a parent, whoever. So let me talk to you a little bit about my personal story with idolization. It was maybe a cautionary tale, because this isn't theory for me. This is lived experience. So there was this woman who I was deeply connected to. She's beautiful, intoxicating, magnetic. Our chemistry was insane. Our first year and a half together felt magical. Our love was intense. The sex felt spiritual. The bond felt deeper than anything I'd ever experienced, and I know that's the same for her. Now I know that because we've had that in discussions. But here's the part that I didn't understand at the time, is that I wasn't just loving her, I was idolizing her. I made her my emotional home. I made her my purpose. I made her my validation. I even made her my peace. Right? And because of all that, I ended up tolerating things that no man or woman should tolerate. Right? Because even when she hurt me, even when it was chaotic, which it was often, even when the darkness around that relationship became spiritual, right? Some of y'all might know that feeling. When there was heaviness, when there was intrusive thoughts, when there was confusion, our connection, it felt powerful, right? But it just wasn't quite holy, if you know what I mean, right? There were moments, where I felt a lot of dark energy attached to our connection. There was a house that we both lived in together where we both experienced demonic oppression. That's a whole nother story for another time. But anyway, this wasn't love. This was bondage. And I stayed because this idolization ends up making you blind. You see their potential, but you don't see the reality. And then you end up chasing that first year and a half version of what things could be instead of who they've become. And truthfully, I outgrew this relationship long before I left. But my soul, it was tied to something that my spirit wanted out of. There's another verse here I want to share. It's Psalms 16:4. And it says, "Their sorrows shall be multiplied who chase after another God." I'll say that again. "Their sorrows shall be multiplied who chase after another God." Right? So this idolization multiplies sorrow, not peace. So let me ask you guys this. Where in your life have you mistaken intensity, right, for intimacy, right? All that chaos and all that highs and lows for intimacy. Because I know we all have. And maybe it wasn't a person. Maybe it was a thing, right? Maybe it was a substance. Maybe it was a thrill. Okay, so let's move on. Let's talk about what idolization does to us, right? Because idolization changes how you think, how you feel, how you behave. Here's what it did to me, right? And I think it will do to anybody who gets caught in it. First and foremost, you lose yourself, right? Your identity disappears inside the relationship, right? I ended up finding myself in doing things I would never have done, right? Or feeling a certain way that I would never feel before. You also stop hearing God, right? The noise from the bond drowns out his voice. That bond can make you not seek God, make you distract you from all of that. Another thing that it does to you is you ignore red flags, right? Your brain filters out anything that threatens the fantasy of what could be, right? So I'll say that one again, right? You ignore the red flags because with idolization, when that occurs, your brain filters out anything that threatens the fantasy, right? Okay, and then next, you tolerate chaos because your nervous system, it gets addicted to the highs and the lows, right? And we'll talk about trauma bonds here in a little bit. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but you tolerate chaos, right? Because you get addicted to that kind of stuff. You often confuse adrenaline with love, right? Where intensity kind of feels like destiny, even though it's very dysfunctional. Your ego becomes involved, Okay. And, you want to be chosen. You want to be the hero. And let me talk about the ego just a little bit before I move forward, because the truth is, the enemy uses your ego to keep you in bondage, right? So, like I said, I want to deep dive a little bit in this, because this is something that I've been kicking around and contemplating and reflecting on. So, ego, it makes you chase validation instead of truth. You get trapped in this cycle of needing to feel wanted instead of being fulfilled. When you let the ego lead, love kind of becomes a scoreboard at that point. Who gave more, who moved on faster, who won. But real love doesn't play that game. In my case, ego even turned pain into pride, right? It made me believe because I helped somebody heal, or I showed, or that I helped them achieve something, that I somehow earned a permanent place in their life or ownership over them even. And I wasn't really protecting my heart doing that stuff. I was protecting my image of what being valued meant. So I'll say that part again. I wasn't protecting my heart. I was protecting my image of what being valued meant. So, ego, it blinds you to reality. It whispers to you, it says to you that if someone moves on, it's about your worth, right? And when in reality, it's just life moving. Ego feeds on comparisons. It feeds on unfinished business. It makes you see healing maybe, as a betrayal, or someone else's progress is maybe your loss. And that's really the real damage, right? It's ego keeps you from actually healing. It keeps you replaying the story over and over again, trying to prove that you mattered, instead of accepting that you did matter, but just not forever and not in that way. And when love ends, ego makes you fight to keep this version of the story alive that no longer exists. And in doing that, you end up wounding yourself the most. Because instead of learning, right, instead of getting better over this, you start defending. And I don't think anything grows in defense mode. And the truth really is the ego hates endings. But endings are what make room for that peace, right? And so that's a good segue actually to the next thing that idolization does to you, is that you lose your peace, right? And in any relationship, whether it's with a person or a thing, any relationship that costs you your peace is already too expensive. So learn that from me. Proverbs 4:23 says, above all else, guard your heart, right? For everything you do flows from it. I'll say that one again. Above all else, guard your heart. For everything you do flows from it, right? If you're in this state of idolization, it removes that guard. So let me ask you guys this. I want you to kind of think about this as we go forward. Where have you traded your peace for intensity in the past? Whether that be with a person or a thing. All right, so let's talk about some other forms of idolization, because it's not always with a person, right? It's not always about a romantic partners. It can show up in all different kinds of ways, right? We can, in my time working in youth sports, people can idolize their children, right? When their identity completely becomes wrapped around them. You stop having boundaries, right? You lose yourself in that. They don't care who they hurt or what other child they have to hurt or whatever, so their child gets their way. Some people can idolize their jobs, right, or their achievements. They can start to believe that their success will somehow save them. A big one is people idolize validation. You know what I'm saying? Like every comment, every compliment they get, it's that little hit of dopamine, right? Or anytime someone tells them they did a good job or whatever, if they're seeking validation from anywhere else other than God, right? It can really, it's hollow. Some people idolize their trauma, which I alluded to earlier. You know, some people cling to their pain because it feels familiar, right? They don't let themselves heal. And this is probably a good time to talk about what a trauma bond is. This is something that I went through, and with my romantic partner that I was talking about earlier is a trauma bond, which is a powerful emotional attachment that forms between a person and someone who repeatedly hurts, manipulates, or abuses them. Right? It's not love in a healthy sense. It's a cycle of pain and reward that creates confusion and dependency. So here's how it works, right? The cycle. It's an abuse or a mistreatment happens, right? Whether it be emotional, physical, or psychological. That abuser shows remorse or affection afterward, or they like get better, they change their behavior, they apologize, they promise to change, they show love, and then that victim feels relief. They feel hope. They believe that this is that person now. Then that tension builds again, and then the abuse repeats. So over time, going back and forth, right? That pain and that comfort, it conditions the brain to associate love with suffering and relief with attachment, right? So we feel relief because we still got them. And it's like, so it's very similar to what an addiction is. And why it feels so strong is dopamine and oxytocin, right? Those feel-good chemicals that our body produces. They're released in those good moments, even after abuse. Then the victim's brain, in this particular case mine, starts chasing those brief highs, right? So, you know, when everything's going wrong and then it starts getting good again, like that dopamine and oxytocin is like becomes comfort, right? And you continue to seek that comfort. But what it is it's not comfort, it's survival, right? It's like, if I can only just get them there and I can start feeling good again. So it's survival, it's not healing. You know, this fear and hope end up becoming intertwined, and it makes it extremely hard to leave, right? So back on course here. Some other things that you can idolize over the other than people is money. I'm sure you were all thinking that when I was talking. People idolize money, right? Believing that wealth will somehow heal their insecurity. Another big thing that people do is we idolize our own image, right? We prop ourselves up on some image that we create, right? We build this persona instead of healing the person. We prop ourselves up off of some alter ego, whatever it is. And, lastly, idolization can happen to substances or maybe even coping mechanisms, right? Where we rely on any of those distractions other than, God, right? Anything you rely on more than God becomes an idol. So Matthew 6:21 says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So whatever you're idolizing, right, reveals where your heart is going. So your heart follows your treasure. Whatever you value most, in other words, right? And whatever you value most controls your emotions. Whatever you keep investing your energy in becomes your master. Whatever you elevate above God, it ends up becoming your source of stress, pain, fear. right? And that's definitely in my case with my romantic partner. And I'm sure you all can relate because maybe it's not a partner, maybe it's a thing, right? So your treasure isn't money, it's whatever you pour yourself into. Some people pour themselves into their time or your focus, your energy, your hope, your identity, your confidence, your self worth. Your treasure is whatever you emotionally bow down to. All right. So let me ask you this. I want you to reflect on this. What's one thing that easily becomes an idol in your life if you're not careful? For me, it's definitely a partner. Like I want to give so much myself to them. I want to just be truly, as one, just so much love, right? But I need to be careful. God needs to be in between that. So, yeah, I'll ask us again. What's one thing that can easily become an idol in your life if you're not careful? Maybe it can be a substance. A lot of people struggle with alcohol and drugs. So let's talk about why we idolize people or things. All right, what's the root cause? Because it's not really about the person. Idolization is not about the person. It's about the wound or that thing, right? Not about the person or the thing. It's about the wound. And that wound could be loneliness. It could be abandonment, right? It could be lack of identity. And I'm going to go off topic here one more time. I want to talk about identity a little bit. Having a lack of identity can really lead us somewhere where we don't want to be. I like to view identity as like guardrails, right? So if you have purpose, if you have identity, I'm this thing. When these bumps in the road come or these barriers come, because they will, they're not, if you don't have identity, they can knock you off course and lead you somewhere where you don't want to be, or they'll just lead you to quit altogether, right? If we have this identity or this mission, those barriers and these speed bumps that come in our way don't matter. We'll find a way to get over them and keep going, right? That's the guardrail. Without that, we could be somewhere where we don't want to be, right? Or in the arms of someone we don't want to be in, or a group of people we don't want to be around, or a substance or a coping mechanism or a distraction that isn't good for us. So really an identity is huge. I think it's the single most powerful tool in our resilience toolbox. Okay. So let's get back on track here. Some of the other wounds, right, that could cause idolization, other than lack of identity, would be low self-worth. A lot of what I went through, I think, with my romantic partner was so much of my self-worth was tied into how much I could help them or save them or do for them, right? It was all tied into that. And even furthermore, a lot of my self-worth was tied up in how good looking of a person I could lay with or be with, or how many women I could get. So having that low self-worth can really make us susceptible to idolization. Another one, like I mentioned before, is craving validation. Another one would be unresolved trauma. This one's huge, right? You got to heal yourself. Searching for healing in humans instead of God. A lot of us do that, unknowingly. And this one was for me, right? Wanting to be the savior. Like I said, a lot of my self-worth was tied into helping others, and it still is to some way, right? So the kind of this savior complex. Another wound is maybe some childhood patterns that are repeating into adulthood, or maybe there's some learned things, some generational curses that we're carrying on. Idolization is just a symptom of unhealed parts. So Psalms 118:8 says, "It's better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in man." And when you trust more than God, right? If you trust in man more than God, rather, heartbreak is inevitable. You could take that from me. That is a direct quote. When you trust in man more than God, heartbreak is inevitable, right? And this includes things that aren't human either, because people aren't the only things that we misplace our trust in. You know what I'm saying? We can put our confidence in money, in success, in substances. Like I said, coping habits, our own strength, our own image, our trauma, our past, maybe a plan that we created in our head, some distractions that numb us, right? A lot of us put our trust in distractions that numb us. Validation from strangers, like I had mentioned twice now. Put our trust in maybe control or routines or addiction. Anything you rely on more than God becomes an idol, simply, right? And idols always collapse under pressure. When you place ultimate trust in something temporary or a false idol, your heart becomes temporary too. When you trust God, your foundation stops shaking. I mean, the answer is right there. So many of us just can't get it right and have been struggling forever because our foundation is wobbly. When you trust God, your foundation stops shaking. So, another reflection question for you. Which wound do you think made you vulnerable to idolization in the past, or maybe even in the present? I know I certainly got mine, right? The self-worth, maybe the loneliness. What wound do you think made you vulnerable to idolization in the past? So great. We now we have an understanding of what it is and what it does to us and how it affects us. How do we break idolization and detach healthily? Because this is where the healing starts. The first thing, most important, and I always think of 40-year-old virgin about this, we've got to remove them or it from the pedestal. And in my case, I was always putting what on a pedestal. If you know the 40-year-old virgin, you know what I'm talking about. You got to say it out loud, right? She's not human, or they're not my savior, or they're not my source, whatever it takes. Like I said, it might not be a person. Maybe it's a substance. Maybe it's a thing that we love to do. Whatever it is, you got to remove them from the pedestal. Okay. And then next, you need to rebuild your identity, right? Ask, who am I without this relationship? Who am I without this drug? Who am I without this whatever? And this also ties to the identity part, because you got to reconnect to purpose. Reconnect to purpose, right? And I think men and women without a mission, they cling to men and women or something that drains them. That's what I was talking about with the guardrails with idolization, right? People without a mission will cling to something that drains them. Next, we have to restore the spiritual order. Okay, this is something that I'm working on right now, and this is what when my next relationships come, this is what it needs to look like, right? It needs to be God first, right? Then our purpose, then our self-respect, then our community, then our relationships, right? It needs to be not the other way around. So many of us have God last, or when it's convenient. And that's a struggle, right? Because so many of us have done that for so long that this is not a habit. This is the way of being. So it really takes intentionality and work and reps to really get that right. I find myself beating myself up along the way. Like, am I even doing this right? But I know that if I keep at it, it's gonna connect, right? It's gonna work. I'm gonna figure out really how to do it. So that's definitely something we got to restore, that spiritual order. God first, family, so on and so forth. So the next thing you got to do, and this might sound obvious, but you got to practice no contact, right? You have to practice no contact from that person or that thing that you're idolizing or that you have let control you. You cannot heal a wound that you keep reopening. Take that from me. You cannot heal a wound that you keep reopening. And then next, you need to rewire the story. Rewrite it, rewire it. Got to change it, right? Like, you know, she was a mirror of my wounds, really, right? She was a mirror of my wounds, not my destiny. You need to justify, rewire that story to where it's strength based, to where it's where you're reframing those thoughts to where they're empowering, right? So in my case, right, she was just a mirror of my wounds, right? Not my destiny. It wasn't made for me. This was not my calling like I thought. She was just a mirror of my wounds. And maybe it's not a she for you. Maybe it's alcohol or drugs or money or whatever. Then I think lastly, you need to rebuild your emotional independence. What I mean by that is what you needed from that person or that thing, learn to get it from God. Really get into the Bible, really start praying. And look, and this stuff doesn't happen over a couple attempts. You know, you're looking at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of attempts to really get this thing figured out. So please don't be deterred, right? Rebuild that emotional independence. Whatever you needed from that person or that thing, learn to get it from God. So in James 4:8, it says, draw near to God and he will draw near to you. Right? Healing begins when the idol leaves and God steps into its place. So let me ask you this. I want you to reflect on this after taking all this in, man. What version of yourself do you want to grow into after hearing this? Because I'm hoping, this inspires you in some way, right? What version of yourself do you want to grow into after hearing this? Okay, so now let me talk to you about what happens after you've broken this false idol, the redemption, if you will, right? What does God do after the idol falls? When God removes an idol, a few things happen. He restores your clarity, right? Your mind becomes sharp again. That's a big thing I value. I have to speak. You're in my office right now. You're involved at headquarters. I have to engage with men to build stronger communities, right? And I can't guide them or give them tools if I can't be clear, if I can't think clearly. So he restores your clarity. Another thing is that he restores your identity. You remember who you were before the bond drained you, right? We put up with so much. We did so many things that we would never have done otherwise. So you remember who you were before the bond drained you. You can move with confidence. Next, he restores your standards, right? You stop settling. That's a big one. A lot of us do that. We don't have any more standards. We let these idols tell us what to do. It restores your standards. Next, he restores your peace. Who doesn't value that, right? That storm is no longer around you or inside of you. You have peace. And what I'm going through now, right? Or what I'm kind of on the other end of it now is that he prepares you for a love that's healthy, right? A love that's healthy, not from a person or a thing or whatever. You get prepared for a love that's healthy, one that's not intense, one that's not chaotic, one that's not addictive, one that's safe, one that's healthy, right? Something that's stable, something that is reciprocal, something God-led. So Isaiah 43:19 says, see, I am doing a new thing. Did you not perceive it? I'm going to say that again. See, I am doing a new thing. Did you not perceive it? Right? And you can't receive a new thing when you're holding on to the old idol. Right? You can't start something new. You can't move forward. You can't get better when you're holding on to the old idol. So let me ask you this too, because what's a new thing you think God might be trying to do in your life right now, but you won't let go of that idol, right? I'm dealing with that right now. Not, to be honest, like I said, I idolize, these women, right? Like how good looking a woman can I be with? How many can I lay with? But that makes me feel right that I'm X, Y, and Z. I'm better than the next guy, or I'm just borrowing confidence from that. And you know, I'm trying to detach from that idol so I can be the best version of myself. God's trying to do that for me right now. So I guess the final, like the lesson in my story that I want to leave you with is idolization almost took me out in a matter of speaking, right? It drained me mentally, it drained me emotionally, it drained me spiritually. It made me feel small. It made me confused. It made me desperate. It made me lose myself. But when that bond finally broke, I felt God pulling me back to my purpose. And I had a lot of prayer for that specific thing, but I felt God pulling me back to my purpose. And now I can look back and say that I wasn't losing love, right? I was losing a version of myself that believed I had to tolerate chaos to feel wanted. Right? I'll say that one more time to you because I wasn't losing love in this particular case. I was losing this chatty old version of myself that believed I had to tolerate chaos and BS to feel loved. Right? So I'm better now. I'm clearer now. I'm stronger now. I'm more aligned with God now. And if you draw some inspiration from what you've just seen, you will be too. Right. So I appreciate you taking the time to watch. Um, Hopefully, this inspired you, like I had said. And if you have any questions about anything that we've talked about here today, please reach out, whether in the comment section or somewhere I'm not too hard to find. My name is Trace Fisher, worked at Involved Dad in Flint, Michigan. I'm a fatherhood practitioner. Um, if you want to learn more about anything, maybe trauma bond or idolization or whatever it is, don't hesitate. I'm always here. Right. So thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next one.